She boarded a plane to say goodbye to her grandmother and never expected the sky to betray her. When a little girl vanishes mid-flight and panic spreads through the cabin, one woman begins to sense that something is very wrong. And she's right. The crash was only the beginning. Stranded, hunted, watched, and every step she takes brings her closer to a truth no one was supposed to survive. Leah Monroe watched the terminal through the scratched glass of Gate 42B, the sound of muffled boarding announcements barely registering over the steady hum in her head. She hadn't slept in 2 days, her thoughts tangled with memories of her grandmother's voice, frail, distant, full of stories Leah had once rolled her eyes at, but now clung to like lifelines. Crescent Air Flight 394 had been delayed twice, and now, with storm clouds curling on the edge of the evening sky, they were finally boarding. She adjusted the strap of her canvas bag and stepped forward, offering the ticket she'd clutched for hours to the gate agent, with a tired smile. Inside the narrow jet bridge, the air was already stale, heavy with recycled breath and tension, and by the time Leah slid into her window seat in row 17A, the buzz in her mind had only grown louder. The plane was full of ordinary passengers, businessmen already typing on laptops, a flight attendant rehearsing her smile, a couple arguing in quiet tones across the aisle. Then, just before the doors closed, a woman in a wrinkled floral dress stumbled down the aisle, gripping a small pink backpack to her chest and calling out for her daughter. "Emma, baby, seat 18C," she said aloud, her voice half shrill with panic, half muttering like she was repeating instructions she'd been given too many times. The girl, maybe 6 or 7, trailed after her, all curls and mismatched shoes, eyes scanning the cabin with shy suspicion before vanishing behind Leah toward the rear of the plane. Leah barely noticed, just another weary mother traveling solo, until 20 minutes after takeoff, the cabin was pierced by the woman's scream. "My daughter! Where is my daughter? Emma?" The lights flickered, heads turned. Seatbelts clinked as people sat up straight, alarm crackling like static through the cabin. A flight attendant rushed forward, the captain's voice stammering through the overhead speaker for calm. But the woman was already in hysterics, clawing past passengers, demanding they look under their seats, check the restroom, insisting her daughter had been right next to her. Leah turned, startled to see Emma's seat completely empty. No child, no backpack, nothing. But how was that possible? She saw her. The woman's cries didn't stop. They escalated. Another passenger yelled about a security threat. Someone hit the call button. Tension snapped like a wire through the fuselage. Leah stood, trying to speak, to help, but her words drowned in chaos. Then a jolt, sharp and unnatural, rocked the plane, and the overhead compartment slammed open. The lights went out. And in the dark, Leah heard a man's voice near the front say, too calmly, "We're ready." For a moment, everything inside the cabin was still frozen in the darkness, as if the power outage had momentarily stopped time. The only sound was the rasping breath of the woman still screaming for her daughter, her voice cracking with hysteria. Then, as if someone had flipped a hidden switch, panic detonated. A chorus of terrified voices rose like a wave, passengers unbuckling, stumbling through the aisle, frantically trying to turn on phone flashlights, yelling for the crew, for help, for answers. The emergency lights flickered to life, casting the interior in an eerie red glow. Leah gripped the headrest in front of her, heart pounding, trying to think through the chaos. Her mind flashed back to the little girl, Emma. She had seen her, hadn't she? Or had the stress, the exhaustion, the long delay blurred her memory? But no, the pink backpack, the little mismatched shoes, she remembered them too clearly. The captain's voice returned, shaky and rapid. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We are experiencing an electrical malfunction and are turning back toward the mainland. Please stay calm." But the voice was drowned out by a sharp metallic clang from the rear of the plane. People screamed. A flight attendant fell to the floor. Leah spun around just in time to see the emergency door alarm blare near the galley. Someone was back there. Then a figure emerged from the shadows, dressed in all black, face covered in a cloth mask, holding something metallic and compact, not a weapon but a device. He didn't say a word as he moved forward, jamming the device against the side panel of the wall and triggering a sickening, rhythmic beep 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 that made Leah's stomach drop. The panic shifted from confusion to pure fear. The word hijacking echoed in the air even before anyone said it aloud. Leah ducked down, grabbing the arm of a trembling teenage boy next to her. "Down!" she hissed. The hijacker wasn't alone. Another man appeared at the front, this one more composed, speaking into the aircraft intercom in a calm, rehearsed tone. "Remain in your seats. You are now under the control of those who understand exactly how much your lives are worth. Any resistance will be resolved. This is not a negotiation. This is the end of your journey." That's when the plane dropped. Not a gradual descent, a plunge. Gasps and shrieks filled the cabin as gravity itself seemed to vanish, then snap back in place. Leah's head slammed against the window. Alarms blared from the cockpit, and the captain's voice screamed over the comms. "Mayday, Mayday, Crescent Air 394, engine failure, we are." Static swallowed his voice. The lights blinked out again, and all Leah could see through the tiny window was blackness. No stars, no land, just the reflection of her own terrified face. The woman who had screamed for her daughter now sat catatonic in her seat, whispering Emma's name like a chant. Leah turned, looking for the little girl, any trace, but there was nothing. No child, no backpack, no witnesses. And in that second, as the plane jolted again and oxygen masks dropped from overhead, something inside her clicked. The girl wasn't real. And as the fuselage groaned under pressure and the world tilted sideways, Leah realized the chaos in the cabin hadn't just been a reaction to panic. It had been crafted, orchestrated. Someone didn't want this plane to land, and they were making sure of it. Impact. Not a crash, but a brutal, grinding, tearing sound. Metal screaming as the ocean swallowed it whole. Leah didn't remember hitting the water. One moment, she was clutching the armrest, watching the wing shear off through the window. The next, she was submerged, lungs on fire, everything blue and rushing. Her seatbelt was jammed. She kicked, twisted, panic rising like a wave in her throat, until a burst of motion to her left freed her. Julian, the man from across the aisle, unbuckled her with trembling hands, eyes wide, bubbles streaming from his mouth. Together, they surfaced into darkness. The sea was frigid and thunderous, waves crashing against flaming wreckage, bobbing in every direction. Leah gasped for air, coughing hard, her ears ringing with screams and static and fire. The nose of the plane had sunk fast. Parts of the fuselage floated nearby, some still glowing from the explosion. Bits of luggage, seat cushions, and torn clothing drifted like a graveyard of the sky. There were others, maybe a dozen, clinging to debris, crying out, but the majority, gone. Somehow, through the chaos, a jagged silhouette rose in the distance. An island, its jagged cliffs glowing faintly under the moonlight. It didn't look welcoming. It looked watching. Leah and Julian swam toward a chunk of wing, barely staying above water. "You okay?" he shouted, teeth chattering. Leah nodded, shivering violently. Behind them, a woman wailed someone's name. Emma, the same woman from the plane, treading water just yards away. "My daughter!" she screamed again, her voice ragged. "She's still inside!" Her eyes met Leah's, and in that moment, Leah saw no grief, no desperation, just calculation. Cold, controlled. The woman didn't try to swim to the wreckage. She just floated, watching, and then she disappeared beneath a wave. It took hours or minutes. Time made no sense before the survivors finally reached the rocky shore. Leah collapsed onto wet sand, coughing seawater, muscles shaking. The moon hung over the island like a spotlight. Julian pulled himself up beside her, blood running from a gash above his brow. They were joined by others, a flight attendant with a broken wrist, A middle-aged couple, 2 teenagers, a man with a military bearing who hadn't said a word. 11 people in total. No sign of the hijackers, no sign of the crew, and no sign of the woman who cried for her daughter. They made a fire from dry leaves and wreckage, wordless at first. Shock angered them all, but Leah's mind was racing. She asked herself the same question over and over. Why create a fake child? Why stage a disappearance on a commercial flight? The distraction had worked. Everyone had been looking for Emma. No one had noticed the men slipping into position. She looked across the fire at Julian. "Something's wrong," she whispered. "This wasn't just a crash, it was a cleanup job." He nodded slowly, wiping the blood from his temple. "We weren't supposed to survive." Silence fell between them, and from the jungle beyond the sand, just past where the firelight ended, came the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Leah snapped her head toward the tree line, heart thudding so loudly she could barely hear the crackling of the fire. The sound of footsteps wasn't the shuffle of wind or the cracking of a distant branch. It was deliberate, rhythmic, as if someone were pacing just out of sight. The jungle pressed close to the beach, dark and breathing, its dense wall of vines and shadow, making it impossible to see more than a few feet in. Julian rose slowly beside her, eyes scanning the darkness. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. A few other survivors looked up, startled. The flight attendant, Carla, hugged her splinted wrist tighter to her chest, while the older couple shifted nervously. No one spoke, but everyone heard it now. The subtle crunch of sand, the movement between palm and vine. Then, silence. Julian grabbed a piece of metal debris and stepped toward the tree line. "Wait," Leah said, grabbing his arm. "Whatever it is, if it wanted us dead, it would have come out already." He hesitated, then nodded and stepped back, his jaw clenched. The fire crackled on, casting orange halos across the group, shadows dancing like figures. "Let's make watches," Leah said. "We don't know what's out there." No one argued. They were still too stunned, too fractured by the trauma of the crash to resist. As the others settled in uneasy sleep, Leah sat at the edge of the fire, a salvaged flashlight in her lap, her eyes locked on the darkness. Julian stayed beside her. "You think the hijackers survived?" he asked. Leah shrugged. "I don't know, but that woman, the one who kept screaming for her daughter, there was something off about her, too calm underneath it all, like she knew what she was supposed to say." Julian nodded. "I keep replaying it. The way she kept yelling the name, making sure everyone heard it. Emma, Emma, over and over." He looked down at the sand. It was a trigger, a diversion. Leah exhaled, the ocean breeze cooling her sweat-slick skin. The question is, who was she working with? Just then, a voice, raspy, hoarse, rose from the edge of the firelight. "I can tell you what I saw," said the military man, whose name they'd learned was Price. He was older than he looked, maybe early 50s, with a shaved head and a deep scar on his cheek. "I was seated near the galley. I saw her hand off a note to the man in 2D, short, wiry guy with a neck tattoo. Didn't match any of the other passengers. A few minutes later, he went into the restroom and never came back out." Julian leaned forward. "And no one questioned it?" "He never came out because he didn't need to," Price said. "He was already where he wanted to be, inside the avionics panel behind the rear bathroom wall." Leah's stomach turned. Sabotage, not hijacking. Price nodded. "I think they planned to down the plane over the open ocean. Minimal debris, no bodies, no evidence. A clean disappearance. But we hit too early. Something went wrong. And now," Julian said, scanning the jungle again, "they know some of us survived." Just then, a scream tore through the night. Not from the beach, from inside the jungle. Everyone jumped to their feet. Carla sobbed, clutching her wrist. "That was a woman, did you hear it?" Leah took a step toward the trees, flashlight trembling in her grip. "It wasn't one of us," she whispered. "No one's missing." The scream came again, but this time it ended with laughter. Low, cruel, and very, very human. The laughter slithered through the trees like smoke, unnatural, guttural, and wrong. It didn't sound panicked or delirious. It sounded intentional. Leah's blood turned to ice as she scanned the wall of vines and branches, the others backing away instinctively toward the fire. "We need to move," Julian said under his breath. "We're exposed out here." Price was already picking up the largest piece of wreckage he could carry, a jagged panel with wiring still clinging to it like tendrils. "There's cover inland. I spotted some cliffs during approach. If we can find high ground, we'll see them coming." Leah looked back at the beach, at the broken remains of Flight 394, glowing embers where a life once headed home had scattered into nightmare. She turned toward the jungle and nodded. "Let's go." They moved as a group, single file, using flashlights and fire-stoked torches to navigate the narrow paths formed between dense walls of fern and root. The air was thick with humidity, and the distant ocean sounded like it was receding, pulling away as if the island itself had inhaled. Price led them, Leah close behind, her ears straining for movement in every direction. Julian flanked the rear, checking their path, while the others, Carla, the older couple, Ruth and Dennis, the teenagers, Bria and Mateo, and two men Leah hadn't spoken to yet, followed in tense silence. They moved uphill, breath shallow, flashlights bobbing. Leah caught herself checking each shadow twice, unsure if it was a tree branch or the silhouette of someone following. They found the cliffs near dawn, jagged stone overlooking the jungle canopy below, and, in the distance, the broken outline of the wreckage on the shore. The view should have offered relief. It didn't. The jungle went on endlessly, an ocean of green hiding things, far more dangerous than wildlife. They made camp again beneath a rock overhang, using seat cushions as bedding and wiring as makeshift barriers. No one slept. No one trusted sleep. Leah paced along the edge, watching the trees below for any movement. That's when she saw it. Smoke. A thin column rising from the trees, a mile inland. Too perfect. Too isolated. Controlled. "That's not from the wreck," she muttered. "That's a camp." Julian joined her, following her gaze. "Maybe another group? Or maybe the people who wanted us dead," she said, checking their work. Later that morning, Price called a meeting. "I'm trained in survival. I know how to navigate this terrain, but this isn't just a wilderness problem. Someone deliberately downed that plane. And now, they're moving through this island, which means they either didn't expect us to survive, or they need something we have." Leah looked at him. "Like what?" Price glanced around. "I don't know yet. But that woman, she wasn't alone. There's a network here, a plan." Just then, Bria, the younger of the teens, called out. She was at the edge of camp, staring at a tree. "Hey, there's something carved here." The group gathered. Leah squinted at the bark. A symbol, sharp, deep, not letters, numbers. 2017年6月3日. "What is that?" Julian asked. Carla gasped softly. "That was the flight number of a crash I read about last year. Cargo jet. Disappeared off radar. Never found." Leah's stomach dropped. "You think they've done this before?" Price's voice was grim. "I think this island is where things, people, go missing on purpose." Before anyone could answer, Mateo, the other teen, stumbled back into the clearing, wide-eyed and trembling. He had wandered off to scout for food. "I found something," he said. "A clearing. And there's a grave." They followed him, and what they found froze the blood in Leah's veins. A freshly dug pit. A wooden sign, hand-carved, jammed into the dirt. One word burned into the surface. Emma. Leah stared at the wooden sign for a long time, her breath shallow, her thoughts crashing louder than the sea below. The name Emma was burned deep into the wood. No date, no flowers, just the name of a child who had never existed. Around the grave, the ground was freshly disturbed, the dirt loose and still dark. It wasn't a crash site burial. It was recent, intentional, and meant to be found. Julian knelt beside it, brushing the soil with trembling fingers. "This makes no sense," he muttered. "She wasn't real. We know she wasn't real." Price circled the clearing like a wolf, testing for traps. "Someone wants us to question that, wants us to think maybe we imagined everything." Ruth took a step back, visibly shaken. "But why? Why fake a girl, then make a grave for her?" Leah's eyes stayed locked on the sign. "Because someone's building a story. For us, for someone else. Either way, it's a performance." They spent the next hour sweeping the area, finding more signs of habitation, scraps of cloth, footprints too large to belong to any of them, cigarette butts, and a rusted-out comms box half buried beneath leaves. It wasn't active, but it had been. Julian opened a side panel, revealing rows of wires that had been cut cleanly. "Someone was transmitting from here," he said, until they didn't need to anymore. Leah ran her fingers along the grave marker again. The wood was damp, freshly carved. The name felt too deliberate. "They're trying to make Emma real," she whispered, "to make us question whether we're the unreliable ones." She looked up at Julian. "You felt it on the plane, right? That edge, like something was off from the start?" Julian nodded. "The tension. The glances between passengers. I think some of them knew." Price joined them, holding up something he'd found deeper in the trees. A small ID badge, laminated, faded by rain. It read, "Project Kestrel, Clearance Level 3, Transit Watch Command." Beneath the name was no photo, just a barcode and an expiration date that had passed 3 years ago. Back at the cliffside camp, the survivors had begun fracturing. The older man, Dennis, was spiraling into paranoia, insisting that they were all part of some psychological experiment. Carla was beginning to agree. The others stayed quiet, watching Leah and Price with wary eyes. That night, as they huddled near the fire again, Julian took first watch. Leah lay awake beside him, staring up at the stars. Stars she didn't recognize. "Do you know what I keep thinking?" she said quietly. "What if the crash wasn't the end of the plan? What if this is phase 2? Julian turned to her. "You think we're supposed to die here? I think we're meant to disappear." But it wasn't until the next morning that the plan, whatever it was, began to take its next step. When Price didn't return from his patrol, Leah and Julian followed his trail. It led to a second clearing, this one more open, oddly symmetrical. At its center was a metal crate half sunk into the ground, as if air dropped. On top of it, blood. A trail leading behind a tree, and behind it, a second grave. Another handmade sign. This one said, "Leah," and this time, it was carved into her handwriting. Leah stumbled backward, her breath catching in her throat as if the air had thickened around her. She stared at the grave marker, her own name carved with unsettling precision. In her handwriting, the slanted loop of the L, the slightly curved crossbar on the A. Details no stranger could mimic unless they had seen her write, recently, purposefully. Julian was speechless beside her, his eyes wide, flicking between the grave and Leah like he wasn't sure which to be more afraid of. This can't be real," he muttered. "Someone's playing with us." Leah knelt slowly, her fingers trembling as she touched the wood. The dirt at the base was loose, freshly turned. They were here no more than a few hours ago. She stood, scanning the jungle, her skin crawling. "Someone's watching us. They've been watching since the crash." Julian exhaled slowly, gripping the machete they'd salvaged from a torn cargo bag. Or maybe before that. They moved quickly, following the blood trail that led behind the grave, but it didn't lead to Price. It ended abruptly at the base of a hollow tree where a broken earpiece, smudged with dried blood, had been shoved into a crevice like someone meant it to be found. There was no sign of a struggle, no body, no footprints heading out. Just silence. Leah pressed the earpiece to her own ear, flipping the switch. Static crackled for a few seconds, then a voice. Faint, familiar, calm, Phase 1 complete. Visual confirmation achieved. Subject L identified. Proceed to psychological disruption. Leah yanked the earpiece away, her pulse racing. They're running some kind of op. A test. I'm a target. Julian looked at her. But why you? What did you do before this flight? Leah's mouth went dry. I was a school teacher. I don't know. I don't have clearance. I don't have enemies. I was going to see my grandmother. But something inside her twisted. An old memory. A fragment. A name whispered over a phone call years ago. One she hadn't thought about in forever. But there was no time to process it. They returned to the cliffside camp. Price was still missing. The others were shaken. Bria was crying. Dennis was trying to build a radio from scraps. And Carla sat alone, staring at a ripped piece of fabric in her lap. Where's Price? She asked without looking up. Gone, Leah said. But someone left a message. She told them about the second grave, the earpiece, the surveillance. At first, no one believed her, until Julian backed her story and showed the ID badge from earlier. They're picking us off, he said. Not to kill us, at least not right away. They're studying how we react. And the graves? Ruth asked shakily. What kind of people carve your name before you die? Leah didn't answer. She was thinking about the voice on the earpiece. Calm, measured, not military, corporate, like someone running diagnostics. That night, she couldn't sleep. She wandered back to the grave marked with her name and stared at it under moonlight. That's when she heard a twig snap behind her. She turned and saw Price, bloodied, eyes wide but alive. He opened his mouth to speak, but a dart embedded itself in his neck before he could. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Leah froze. From the darkness, 3 figures in black stepped silently into view. They didn't speak. They didn't attack. They simply stood, watching. And then, without warning, turned and walked back into the jungle, leaving Leah with a body, a grave, and a choice she didn't yet understand. Leah knelt beside Price's unconscious body, pulse hammering in her ears, her hands shaking as she checked for a pulse. He was alive, but barely. His skin was clammy, his pupils sluggish, and the dart still protruded from his neck. She yanked it out and tossed it aside, her gaze flicking toward the jungle where the 3 figures had vanished. Their retreat was not fear. It was control. She could feel it, the way they let her see them, the way they moved without urgency. This wasn't about eliminating threats. This was about watching what she would do next. And the grave with her name on it, that was a message. We already know how this ends. She dragged Price back to the cliff camp with Julian's help, his weight awkward, limbs limp. The others crowded around, voices panicked, overlapping. What happened to him? Was it an animal? Did you see them? Leah silenced them with a look. He was drugged, not mauled, not injured, targeted. She told them about the 3 figures, tall, silent, dressed head to toe, in matte black suits, without insignias or weapons. They didn't run. They didn't speak. They watched me and then walked away. Carla went pale, like they're not done with you yet. Leah didn't answer. She just looked at Price, unconscious but breathing steadily. They'd left him alive. They wanted her to find him. As the group argued over whether to stay or flee into the jungle, Leah sat apart with Julian and unwrapped something she hadn't shown anyone yet, a piece of the earpiece she'd broken off earlier. Tucked beneath the casing, almost hidden, was a tiny chip etched with coordinates. Julian traced them into the dirt. It was an inland location, farther than they'd gone before, deep in the jungle center, too precise to be a camp. That's a facility, he whispered. A hub, maybe even a control center. Leah nodded. We need to go there. Whatever's going on, it's coming from that place. Julian looked at her. You realize what this is, right? This whole island? It's not just remote. It's repurposed, modified, like a test chamber, Leah finished. We're being studied like lab rats. At dawn, they left the others behind, telling them only that they were scouting for water. Leah, Julian, and Bria, who insisted on coming, trekked through the jungle for hours. The air grew thicker the deeper they went, and the canopy blocked out the sun, plunging the forest into a perpetual dusk. Along the way, they found more signs: crushed communications gear, torn uniforms, metal stakes in the trees, with tiny black domes, cameras. One of them was pointed directly at Leah. She stared into the lens. "You're not invisible anymore," she said. They found the facility behind a curtain of vines, a concrete structure half buried in the hillside, camouflaged by time and jungle. The doors were rusted but not locked. Inside, it was cold. Clinical. The power was flickering. Rows of monitors. Some cracked, displayed old footage of various forest areas. And then, a live feed. Their camp, the survivors, visible in black and white, moving around the fire. But it was the next screen that chilled Leah to the bone. It showed a bedroom, a hospital bed, a heart monitor, and in it, her grandmother, alive, hooked up to machines, sleeping. "What is this?" Julian breathed. "They have footage of your—" "She died," Leah said softly, "2 days ago, before I left. That's why I was on the plane." Then the screen flickered. The image of her grandmother disappeared, replaced by a digital rendering of Leah's face. Lines of code scrolled beneath it. Subject 2. Response. Phase 2 initiated. Bria took a step back. "What is this place?" Leah turned toward them, her eyes burning. "This isn't just an experiment. It's personal. It's been about me from the beginning." And somewhere behind the wall, a door clicked open. The sound of the door unlocking was so subtle, so smooth, it didn't echo like it should have in a place made of concrete and steel. It was inviting, not threatening, another carefully placed piece in a puzzle someone wanted Leah to keep solving. She turned to Julian and Bria, their faces pale in the blue flicker of the monitors, and moved toward the far wall where the door had cracked open. Behind it was a narrow hallway, dark except for a faint yellow glow at the far end, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. The walls were lined with vented panels, the hum of machinery vibrating through her feet. "We shouldn't be here," Bria whispered, but no one turned back. They followed the hum deeper into the island's belly, where secrets had been allowed to live for far too long. At the end of the hall was a circular chamber, colder than the rest, sterile and windowless, illuminated by a single ring of soft overhead light. In the center stood a podium-like terminal, its screen blinking with a single prompt. "Input subject verification, L. Monroe." Leah hesitated. "They knew I'd come." Julian stepped forward. "This is insane. They've been tracking you for, what, years? What could they possibly want?" Leah's eyes didn't leave the screen. "They want to see what I'll do, how far I'll go." She pressed her palm against the scanner, and the screen changed. Dozens of documents appeared: surveillance logs, psychological profiles, incident reports. The files labeled Project Fogroot, Subject L, and Dissociation Stress Model scrolled past faster than she could read, but one folder stopped her cold. Crescent Air, 394 Contingency Report. She opened it. There, in plain text, simulated disappearance, Emma, AI-generated passenger persona. Function, cabin disruption. Objective, induce panic plus crowd fracture. Secondary protocol, hijack masking protocol, HMP. Sabotage activation concurrent with staged passenger loss. Projected outcome, 100% fatality. Status, compromised, 11 survivors. Phase 2 initiated. Bria covered her mouth. "They," created Emma, as a decoy. Julian's jaw clenched. They knew how the plane would go down. They wanted it to. Leah kept reading. The files were clinical, detached. It had all been a test of reactions. Her empathy, her leadership under trauma. But why? What made her so special? Then she found the answer, hidden in a buried file. Project Cedarline, Inheritance Model. Subject L. Monroe, daughter of A. Monroe, deceased. Former operative, classified asset, genetic profile anomaly, targeted for observation since 2016. Leah staggered backward. My mother, she was part of this? Julian caught her, steadying her as her world cracked open. All the strange silences growing up, the sudden relocations, the phone calls her mother used to take at 2 a.m., the paranoia that never made sense until now. She wasn't crazy. She was protecting me. Just then, the lights shifted, casting the room in amber. The monitors on the surrounding walls blinked to life, showing a new live feed, the survivors back at the cliff camp. Only now, they weren't alone. 5 of the black-suited figures were standing in the open, surrounding the fire, not attacking, just watching. Then, the screen split, showing another feed of Leah's grandmother, again alive in her hospital bed, only this time the footage zoomed out, revealing wires connecting her to a separate monitoring station. The screen labeled it simply, Subject a -001. Bria turned away, shaking. They're experimenting on her too. No, Leah said hollowly. She's part of the system. Behind them, the chamber lights pulsed again. A voice filled the room, calm, feminine, synthetic. Subject L. Monroe, your final parameter has been met. Initiate core protocol? Leah's fingers hovered over the screen. What happens if I say yes? The voice answered instantly. Survivors terminated, system reset, memory loop reinstated. Julian's voice was low. They want you to erase all of this, like it never happened. Bria's eyes were wide with horror. You have the kill switch. Leah stared at the glowing console, at her own reflection in the glass, surrounded by ghosts and data and lies. She had come to say goodbye to her dying grandmother. Instead, she had uncovered the legacy of a mother she never truly knew, and a machine that believed her life was an equation to solve. And now, it was asking for her choice. The screen in front of Leah pulsed steadily. The words, "Initiate core protocol," frozen like a loaded weapon waiting for her command. The artificial voice repeated its prompt, soft and clinical. Survivors terminated, system reset, memory loop reinstated, confirm. She stood there motionless, her reflection staring back at her in the glass of the console, eyes wide, hair damp with sweat, face streaked with dirt and truth. Julian and Bria were behind her, silent, waiting, watching. She thought of the plane, of the woman screaming for a daughter who never existed. She thought of the graves carved with names before they were earned. She thought of her mother, long gone and now revealed to be something far more complex than she'd ever known. A warning, a warrior, or a cog in a much larger system. And then she thought of her grandmother, who wasn't just dying in a hospital room, but wired into the core of this place, kept alive as part of a web Leah had only begun to understand. I'm not doing it, she said. Her voice didn't tremble. Julian stepped closer. Are you sure? Yes. Leah's eyes stayed fixed on the prompt. They want to clean the slate, like they've done before. Wipe the data, kill the witnesses, start again. But if I don't press it, if I leave it open, it breaks the loop. We become the variables they didn't account for. The voice responded instantly, almost curious. Core protocol disarmed. System logic conflict detected. Suddenly, the lights in the chamber flickered violently, and warning sirens began to blare. The screens shifted to red. One word flashed repeatedly. Override, override, override. You broke it, Bria whispered. You actually broke it. The facility trembled as though the earth beneath them had stirred. Monitors sparked. One of the walls hissed open, revealing a tunnel lit with emergency lights, a path, an exit. The system was purging itself, Leah didn't hesitate. She turned and ran. They sprinted through the tunnel, dodging sparks and collapsing wires. The air thick with the scent of ozone and something deeper, like rotting electricity. At the end of the corridor, they found a hatch. Julian slammed the lever down, and the door groaned open into sunlight. Real sunlight. They burst out into a clearing high above the cliffs, the ocean roaring below them, the sky a brilliant, impossible blue. Below, on the beach, the remaining survivors were still gathered, but now the black-suited figures were gone, scattered, or maybe freed. Leah waved her arms, screaming their names. Carla turned, eyes widening, then pointing upward in disbelief. "She's alive!" Julian fired a flare gun into the air, a stolen emergency shell they'd found near the facility's supply locker. It arced high and burst in a trail of red. Within minutes, they heard it, the deep hum of approaching helicopters, real ones, with markings, with answers. Later, as the survivors were loaded into medevac birds, Leah sat on the sand, wrapped in a blanket, watching the island from the edge of her vision. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel over. The officials asked questions she didn't answer. The story would be rewritten, she was sure. Something about a rogue Black Ops experiment, a plane malfunction, a remote island testing psychological thresholds. Nothing they would ever release to the public. But the real story, her story, lived in what she chose not to erase. A week later, back on the mainland, Leah visited the hospital listed in the files. She found her grandmother's room, empty, bed made, machines gone. A nurse walked by. "Oh, Mrs. Monroe," the woman said, pausing. "She passed peacefully, but she spoke of you. Right before. Said you'd finally come full circle." Leah smiled faintly, tears in her eyes. She always knew more than she let on. That night, Leah sat in her small apartment, alone, staring at the envelope they'd handed her after the crash. No return address. Inside was a photo, a woman in uniform, her mother, standing in front of a jungle clearing. On the back, a handwritten message. "Don't press the button. Remember who you are." Leah looked out the window at the night sky, at the stars. No longer trapped, no longer observed. And far from finished,